Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
Hello, everybody. We are here today together with Mike to present the webinar about managing IR risk effectively using standards 2701, 2705. Welcome to everybody. I'm Sabrina Feddal, cybersecurity expert with 20 years experience in this field of activity. And I'm currently managing the Probe I.T company, which is delivering its customer with a governance, risk assessment, and compliance services. Mike, you can present yourself before starting the meeting.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Mike Boutwell. I have 15 years of experience in information security risk, and I'm an independent consultant and trainer. So thanks for joining us, and I guess we can move on, Sabrina. Yeah.
So today, why are we here? We're trying to explain how can the standards 2701 and 05 can benefit to manage effectively artificial intelligence risks. So while we were preparing this presentation with Mike, we found out that it would be very interesting to start talking about use cases. What are the practical use cases we can talk about when we talked about artificial intelligence, and then starting to point out some threats that can be specific to IA. And then we're going to talk about the global approach, why ISO 2701 and 05 can benefit, why this approach is efficient to manage risk. Then we will make, after this, a good focus, I would say, on the IA threat model that we propose, because as we will explain, IA threat modeling is in the core of risk assessment activity and is important to know about, I would say, the main threats that can be specific to artificial intelligence. And at the end, before the question and answer that we will pick up at the end of the session, we will talk about relevant controls that we can highlight using 2701 and 05 to manage this artificial intelligence risk. First of all, what are we talking about when we talk about artificial intelligence? Of course, you may know that this terms refers to simulation of human intelligence in machines that are programmed to think and learn like humans. Basically, we can categorize artificial intelligence, currently speaking, in two main categories: weak IA, that are systems designed and trained for a particular task. For example, we can talk about Apple series, which is an example of this kind of artificial intelligence. And some other category, the second one is strong IA. These systems possess the ability to perform artificial intelligence, any intellectual tasks that are human being. They are theoretical possible and they are under development. Just to talk about these slides, IA is a rapidly evolving field with application in a lot of sectors of activity, including, as you see in the screen, healthcare, finance, automotive, and so on. It's also the potential to revolutionize the way we live, we work, and making processes more efficient for the businesses, accurate and cost effective. So as one friend of mine say, artificial intelligence will be your next friend for the next few years. In terms of market and the size that we take, the importance of artificial intelligence within our life, we can talk about Forbes Advisor and IA market study that stated artificial intelligence market is expected to reach $407 billion by 27 currently. So if we just try to explain some use cases, starting talking about these domains, let's take, for example, healthcare and medicine. In this scope, in these fields of activity, artificial intelligence will be very interesting to develop algorithm that can analyze medical images like X-rays, MRIs, CT scans. And this capability will help and is helping currently diagnosis disease such cancer or diabetes. So it is very important, and it fasten the way that we detect this disease. It can also be used to discover drug. He helps in predicting molecular behavior and accelerating the drug discovery process. And let's say that some platforms such as IBM Watson Health is currently used to do this, DeepMind Health also. So you see that just for this field of activity, it is very interesting. Another example in finance, we can talk about algorithm trading. Algorithm trading are used for high frequency trading in the trend market, and they help making decisions based on market data analysis very fastly. They can be used also, and MasterCard and other editors are using it currently to use fraud detection. They can detect IA unusual patterns indicating fraudulent activities in banking and credit card transactions. So we'll see, we're not going to detail all the impact and all the use cases in all industries. If you want, we can detail this during the question and answers, but because it is widespread and announces a revolution in the way we are working, risk inherent to those systems are to be carefully considered, identified, treated, and monitored by companies. About the day-to-day use case, I mean examples that can be common to a lot of companies, a lot of sectors, not only a particular sector or particular use case. What are we facing currently as a day-to-day activity as a security expert in some companies that we are working on? We have detailed three of them in this slide, and three other in the other slide. Mike will detail them, but just to start, the use cases that we see as a security expert is that our colleague from the development department are currently using this IA application, the IA capability to develop application. Let's say that in this case, we can think as a security experts, of course, as threats and how we can help them to build these applications securely. Because I put some example. There's some threat that we can imagine very easily about, for example, training the models with wrong data or irrelevant algorithm. They can lead to very important impact, and we will see it at the following of the presentation. Other use case that we can talk about as a data is automation, and I put the word shadow IT because our colleagues, I would say every colleague in the company was very happy, were really happy and are very happy to use, I would say, some application like ChatGPT or any other application in deepfakes that can be very useful to make them work faster than it is today. And these employees are maybe using this SaaS application, this IE application, without noticing the, I would say, the IT department, and it is maybe not detected, and it can raise issues and threats about, I would say, document creation and manipulation, as if we upload data outside the company. Of course, we think as a security expert at data leakage issues. Last for this slide is a use case, and now is from the, I would say, cyber criminality side, is the cyber response capacity that can bring IA to cyber criminality field. This IA capabilities is used to build cyber weapons currently because it can faster the vulnerability detections and exploitation. And also another word is about deepfake capability. Currently speaking, we have lot of, I would say, application online that can be very useful or very easy to use, such as DeepFace Live, SwimSwap, and Ghost, which is a generative high fidelity shot transfer. So we can use images, video, to impersonate people. So it will have a lot of impact, not only now, but in the future, as a side effects on school, using this image, this video as blackmail for people, and also for social engineering.
Okay, so further on in use cases are AI-based OCRs. These are document readers. A very common case for where these are used are in accounting automation. So you have an invoice or a paper bill that you wish to import that data. Well, a lot of the more modern tools use AI to do the pattern recognition on the actual text to import it into a more automated system and a system that can handle large volumes of invoices and other types of documents. And so the real challenge is, besides the accuracy of the actual data, is the manipulation of that data once it's imported into the system, so the importation of the data after it's read. Another use case are AI-powered assistants, such as Microsoft Copilot or ChatGPT. Some of the more common concerns about these, I don't feel are all that big risks because it can be mitigated by other actions, which we'll look at later on. But for certain aspects of these, documents can be read within file directories if you so choose to set that up. So for example, you can use an assistant to scan large amounts of files, let's say legal files or any sort of maybe risk files or things like of that nature. And then you can basically talk to those files or talk to the collective intelligence or the information within those files in a pretty much instantaneous period of time. And this reduces the amount of time it takes to analyze all those documents. And if the computer that assistant sits on or has access to is not properly monitored, then whoever gets access to that system can further access those documents. Also, the file structure containing all of that information is at risk of being used potentially to gather information in more of a passive attack, where they're just collecting information on, for planning on a future attack, something like that. So these are really the use cases that a lot of people really aren't thinking about. The common ones are things like data leakage, which you can basically, we'll get into the controls later on, but those are the more common concerns of data leakage. And AI and cybersecurity tools, it's already been kind of used already, but obviously they're going to be used much more extensively. And this is a double-edged tool because some of the tools in cybersecurity, they're used for, let's say, penetration testing. So you want to secure your application. Well, there are open source tools now where you can do penetration testing planning and how you're going to execute a penetration test, and also kind of an assistant to kind of guide you if you get stuck. And then an attacker can actually use that in a real life scenario. And then there's also the use case where there's false alerts. This could happen through new attacks coming out that we haven't seen before. If that emerges and they're either false positives or false negatives, and either threats are ignored that are actual real threats that you need to respond to, or there's false positives. All right, so next slide, Sabrina.
Yeah. So about just after this, I would say, panorama of IE use cases, I mean, in a day-to-day activity and a large-scale activity, let's now focus on approach to manage risk, and especially why do we have and can we benefit from ISO 27001 and 005 standards to manage the risk effectively. So as you may know, ISO 27001 is a widely recognized international standard for managing information security. It will provide, as you use it, a systematic approach to manage sensitive company information so that this information will remain secure. And I would say the main benefit is that ISO 27001 provides a structured and comprehensive approach to managing the specific risk associated with IA if we use it for IA. So we put some reason why it could be interesting to use the standard. And let's start by, of course, the first point is enhance data security, especially data protection. As you know, IA will be used to be trained a lot of information, a large volume of sensitive data to be able to process them and to restitute them. So if you use these standards, you will establish reliable data protection measures, monitor them, and ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of this data are okay. Also, using the standard, you can prevent data breaches. Using the way that ISO 27001 has been conceived, you can implement standards controls and can benefit significantly to reduce risk of data breaches. Second point is that using the standard, it is stated that you have to think about the compliance and legal insurance. We will see after in the presentation, but IE technologies is very threatening for a lot of countries and all over the world. A lot of people are asking themselves questions about the future and maybe dystopic world about this IE technology. And we are in the world now that this IE technology are subjected to a lot of regulations depending on the country, depending on the continent. We will have a word about it after, but this is very important to be taken into account. For example, GDPR, IEU Act that is currently under preparation. So IE 2701 provides this framework to ensure compliance with these regulations will be under control, and it will help you to reduce legal risk. I will mean risk of non-compliance with the regulation and the laws. It can be used also in this scope as a way to demonstrate due diligence. Adherence to ISO 27001 will be certainly demonstrate to regulators and stakeholders, not only the regulators, but all stakeholders, that your organization is taking proactively steps to secure its IS system. The third point, and this is the point that why we are organizing the webinar today, is of course ISO 2701 is stated that we have to put in place a systematic risk assessment and tailored risk mitigation. So in this standard, it is compulsory to conduct regular risk assessment that helps you to identify potential risk and those, of course, specific to IA, such algorithm biases or decision-making errors. We will see after the threats that are more specific to IA. And of course, once you have identified those risks, you can assess them and build tailored risk mitigation and of course a strategy to ensure that IS systems are under control and the risks are managed effectively in alignment with organization risk appetite, but also with, as we see, with regulations and laws. Third point is stakeholder confidence and trust. We can complain that some IA lack of transparency. So using this standard, ISO 2701, you will make some kind of transparency about the security that you put in place and the risk that you have identified and monitor using ISO 2701. So it will build consequently a trust with your users, your customers, your partners, the regulators, and it will be, I would say, in the core of the IE-driven product and services to be transparent and inspire confidence to the stakeholders to make sure that they are well updated and not generate threats to people and companies. As I said, transparency and accountability. As you manage your security with ISO 27001 standard, you will encourage transparency in managing information security risk and promote accountability in IA operations and decision-making process within your companies. The last point are business continuity and resilience. Your IA system, we saw that there's, I would say, a lot of use cases that are very critical. We talked about examples in healthcare industry that are using IA to make decision, to make, I would say, diagnosis about disease. We can also talk about in laws that you can maybe some in the future make judgment using the IA. So it will be critical of course, in confidentiality, but also in availability. And in this scope, of course, ISO 27001 can also help to build business continuity and resilience at the good level, because they will provide a methodology standard to build resilience against information security incidents that can occur from time to time, every day, or we don't know when, but it will help to do this, and ensuring that these IA systems that will become more and more critical remain operational and reliable. Last point is very important, and this is I would say also a very important point to highlight, is that this standard ISO 27001 will install a continuous monitoring and improvement of your cybersecurity posture against threat, against risk, because it is emphasizing the importance of regular reviews and updates of the information system management that we will put in place to control your security. So it will ensure that the risk management strategies that you put in place, identifying threats, identifying vulnerabilities, identified impact, identified probability of occurrence, this strategy will remain effective and relevant over time and will be efficient facing threats that will evolve also continuously. Also, this improvement and continuous monitoring will be helped by the standard, because in the standard, if you put in place the standard, you will have to set up regularly internal audits. The standards require this regular internal audits to assess the ISMS, I mean the information system management security, and ensure that compliance with the standard and the organization's own security policies are up and running.
Yeah, so ISO 27005 is very, very important, especially when you're talking about managing artificial intelligence risks, because a proactive approach for emerging risks really starts with identifying the risks. And as we started off the presentation with the use cases are very, very important, because artificial intelligence has a very wide application. So when you're starting off the approach to however you're going to manage those risks, you need to know exactly what you're dealing with. So you start off with a use case, and then you do a risk assessment to give you the actual list or context of what risks you're going to be dealing with. And then you can apply best practices and standards once you understand the use case and the risks that you're facing. And when you take this approach, it's a tailored approach, as Sabrina was referring to, rather than a more general approach. So you really want to tailor your controls to the very specific use case and to the risks, and you don't really want to work off generalities. So we can speak in generalities in terms of examples in this presentation, but the application of a chatbot or an assistant is going to be slightly different for each organization, and you really want to tailor your risk assessment to your current challenges, because there could be existing gaps in your controls, and if you want to implement artificial intelligence in your business, you need to take into consideration those aspects as well. So Doing this will enhance stakeholder confidence because the stakeholders will understand that you're taking on emerging technologies in a wise manner. So it's always great to take on the benefits of emerging technologies, because if you don't, you obviously suffer potential loss of competition or loss of market share through not taking on the advantages of technologies such as artificial intelligence. But you want to do that in a way that doesn't endanger your business, or if it does, in such a way where it's tolerable to whatever potential losses or impact that it could have. So the improved decision making and governance is extremely important around artificial intelligence, particularly around the strategy. So you want to really start off with an artificial intelligence strategy for your organization. What kind of tools make sense? You don't want a lot of entities within your organization making independent decisions on this. So you don't want one organization selecting a specific chatbot and then another selecting a different one. And then over time, you have a hodgepodge of maybe 20 or so. You want a really methodical and specific approach to how you deal with this to minimize the overall risk. And so you don't have the shadow IT that Sabrina was talking about earlier in the presentation. Okay, so you can move on to the next slide. Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. So now that we are a bit talking about IA use cases, I would say generally speaking and more specific in your day-to-day activity, and also the why we should use ISO 27001 approach to manage risk, we propose you to focus on, I would say, some kind of threat model that we've been working on with Mike, gathering all information about I would say the state of art that we have currently on this threat model. Maybe you, Mike.
Yeah, coming off mute. Yeah, so again, the threat modeling is increasingly important, and it's because the risk assessment and treatment is really the starting phase for understanding your specific use case. Without a risk assessment, you can't really get specific about the kind of risks that your organization is facing specific to AI. So the risk assessment really needs to be tailored to the context. That means the industry, the type of AI that you're using. We'll talk a little bit more about regulation, but we briefly touched on it. So things like the EU AI Act, which is in draft stage right now, the kind of AI and the application that AI is being used for, let's say HR or maybe some technical reasons, the regulatory risk is very different there. And so you really want to get specific, and you don't want to be general at all. And the risk assessment helps identify those. And then with the risk assessment, you can treat those risks in the way that you need to. So again, the use cases are fundamentally important, and the foundational controls are more important than ever, because if you just pay attention or focus on the potential new threats like employees leaking data, let's say the classic example of employees putting out proprietary data into ChatGPT, and then somehow it gets learned, and then it gets propagated through other users accessing that data inadvertently. Well, that's a very, very simple case, but that's a more modern case of AI. But what if we think about the potential design of access controls? So if you have an artificial intelligence system that is accessing documents that you currently have, and you already have a weakness in your access controls and your identification and labeling of data, which is both are very fundamental types of controls, then once you connect AI into accessing that system, it further increases the risk and the, I guess, attack surface or the threat of that data being accessed by unauthorized parties or misused and so forth. So the foundational controls are more important than ever. And really the foundational controls, once you get those under control, then it's going to help you comply with emerging technology threats easier as they come on into the future. Not only in AI, but any emerging technology is going to be easier to manage from the risk perspective. So, yep, that's it.
Now, I would propose you to think about some kind of example, because of threat model that we can set up and use to start the job of assessing a risk and specific risk of IA within your company. So in this slide, you see that we gathering on the right, we would say that this is more specific threats that can characterize the IA. It will, as we say, IA bring numerous benefits, and it will also introduce a range of cyber threats that need to be carefully managed. Building a threat model and enumerating threat is highly important in a risk assessment perspective. So let's take some examples that are specific to IA. On the right slide of the side, you have data poisoning and model manipulation. This kind of threat will appear when attackers will intentionally manipulate the training data of the IA model itself to cause incorrect outputs and decisions. So this can be done basically by injecting malicious data into the training set. So this is the act of data poisoning, or directly tampering with the model. So in this case, we will talk about model manipulation. And this attack can lead to wrong decision making, misclassification, and it will have some very large and important impact if you make your risk assessment on, for example, if you're working on automotive industry, it can make the system take the wrong decision while you are driving on the traffic, or if you are using this system to diagnose disease, it will give you the wrong decision. So we'll say that this kind of specific threat will have certainly to be considered in your risk assessment exercise and work when you will perform it and tailor it to your company. The second point is adversarial attack. These involve creating inputs that are specifically designed to trick IA model into making mistakes. So you put inputs in the system. Known and adversarial attack are often indistinguishable from normal inputs to the human eye, but can cause the IE to misclassify or produce erroneous output. And this attack can be used, for example, to bypass IA-driven security system by manipulating automatic process, and as a consequence, cause the IA system to reveal sensitive information. Now, the third point is, as any technology, I would say, IE can be, and we talked about it at the beginning of the webinar, IE, of course, can be used to empower cyber criminality. So they will enhance, in this case, the effectiveness of cyber attacks. Because IA can be used to automate the discovery of vulnerability, as we said, and optimize malware, conduct sophisticated social engineering attacks using, for example, deepfake, audio, video deepfake. We'll see that in the scope of the cybercriminality that some, I would say, IE cybercriminal as a service has already been published. We can talk about, for example, Worm GPT, and some other technology that are specifically used to tailor malware by the attackers. What the fourth, threat is not so specific to IA, but can also be studied in this case, is just exploitation of IE system vulnerability itself. So that's why, and this is the transition with the left part of the slide. I mean, the 4 categories you see. When you think about threat model of IA, we can maybe put some categories that are gathering these threats into big categories, and this category, I would say, exploitation of IE system will enter in the second category, threats to IA. And when we also think about the threat model, we can think about 3 other categories, which is the threat using IA, prompting IA, using as a Lambda user the ChatGPT, for example, uploading data and so on. And threat from IA will be considered and gather all threats around the exploitation of this IA as a weapon. The third category is the one that Mike will talk about, is legal and regulatory activity. So maybe let's continue about the threat that can be considered once you will be in charge of making your risk assessment for IA developed internally or used by your colleague. We can talk, of course, about privacy violation. As we already talked about, IA systems often require access to large amounts of data, and some of this data will, of course, be sensitive or personal data because they are used to train this model and to make decisions and to give you answers. There are risks associated with how this data is collected, used, and stored. We can give some example and impact about this risk. Of course, you can, I would say, think immediately about data breaches, about misuse of personal data that will lead to privacy violation. And as you know, privacy violation will have impact on your customers, but also will have impact in a legal way, because a lot of regulation exists either in Europe or worldwide speaking, protecting this private and this privacy of the people around the world. Another specific threat that can be discussed will be just about the IE model theft. Your developers are developing, as this is their work, an IE model to build your own application within your company. And then you have to protect this IE model, because the stealing of the IE model, especially those who are proprietary or contain sensitive data, will raise an issue about your intellectual property, and also will have impact on your competitive advantage about your competitors, and also potentially misuse of the stolen model. For example, you stole a model to generate codes, then you can steal this model and build something to generate malicious code, and could be, of course, used at this finality. The two last threat model can be linked to lack of transparency and explainability. In this case, I mean that many IA systems, particularly those based on deep learning, are often seen as black boxes with limited transparency. You put data on it, but you don't know how it works. And this lack of explainability can hide a lot of vulnerabilities and biases. I mean, to take decision about, we have some example in the hiring application, you can sometimes hire people using IA, and you reproduce biases, not, for example, hiring women in cybersecurity, even though they are qualified, for example. This is a very easy example, but this lack of transparency, of course, can lead to difficulties in identifying the root cause of error of breaches in a security perspective, and challenges in ensuring accountability of the risk, and of course the risk of unintended, unaccepted biases, to make decision by the IA. The last point, the last thread that we can think about, this is not, of course, I would say you have to tailor it to your own context, and you can think a lot of threat also, but we propose this to share with you. The last is dependency and over-reliance. Over-dependence on IA systems for critical processes without adequate fallbacks or understanding of the IA decision-making process. And the impact is in the event of IA failure or compromise, there could be significant disruption to essential service and operation. Now, just to make some details about the category that we presented just before, and we're talking about a big category, we put here some mapping that can also be considered. So take this as tools that you can reuse for your own risk assessment. You have the first slide which is presented, but this slide can also be useful. You can consider using OWASP model, so top 10 for large language model application, and also OWASP machine learning security top 10. Classify the threat into these main categories. We can maybe continue to explain some of them, not all of them, because we lack time. But let's take, for example, sensitive information disclosure. So this is maybe the main consideration that we have as a security expert to cope with and to manage. There will be an intentional exposure of confidential or sensitive information by IEC system. We talked about use cases. You can manipulate I would say files and trying to get answers from your public IAM that is accessible by a lot of people. Then you have no guarantee that this data are confidential and will be kept in secret. So they are public. You will have to face this, of course, these threats. It can be also the case if you build an IE model and in some field of activity, for example, in healthcare, then you have some patient management system to manage the patient that are IE based. And in this case, it will be very impacting for the privacy of the patient if inadvertently you disclose with this kind of system the sensitive health records. We can talk also about, when you talk about threat to IA model, about the model poisoning. So the model poisoning is when you, as an attacker or inadvertently introduce harmful data into IE model's training set to corrupt its learning process and outcomes. So let's take an example in automotive industry. You can think about consequences. Introducing harmful data in the training set of an autonomous driving IA can cause, of course, unsafe driving behaviors of this automobile. One of the threats that are specific to threat coming from usage of IA, I mean, as a cyber weapon, is the acceleration of attack. So IA, as we said, as we already said, can speed up the process of identifying vulnerabilities or executing attack. And they can be used in a large scope of use cases to, for example, find and exploit vulnerability in hospital networks in a very fast way, conduct I would say AI-driven program rapidly to make financial cyber attacks like high-speed trading manipulation. So you can manipulate the trade of the money and produce a large impact on the society. And also in the automotive industry, you can quickly identify and exploit vulnerabilities in autonomous vehicle, making them taking the wrong decision, and so on. In the attack acceleration category, we can also talk about the deepfake capability that are used to create highly realistic but fake audio and video content, and that increase impact on social engineering attack. We can think about the president fraud that is asking to a collaborator to transfer money. And with this kind of capability, I mean, you can in real time impersonate the identity of the CEO or of an important people. You can convince more easily the person to make the wrong choice. One of the points also about specific threat that can be under the threat from IA models category is the hallucination squatting. sometimes exploiting IE system tendency to hallucinate or generate false data under certain circumstances. But this can be, should be considered when you set up and lead your risk assessment, because depending, of course, of your use case, it can lead to a big and important impact, such, for example, let's take as always the example of healthcare that we know very well in Probe I.T. Manipulating IA diagnostic tools can produce incorrect medical diagnosis. So you see that directly it will be a very strong and important impact, critical impact on the and consequence for the patient and the privacy of the people. Maybe Mike, you want to talk about the legal and regulatory threats?
Yes, so AI is being increasingly regulated. Most of the laws and the regulations are in draft mode, and they are going to take quite some time, especially in the EU, to really fully get dealt with and become into more mature law, because you'll find that artificial intelligence and the development of these tools is advancing significantly faster than the development of the law. So the EU AI Act is in draft mode right now. The key point about this is that within the AI Act, there are risk levels that are mentioned. So, for example, human resources AI type tools and systems are classified as high risk according to the Act in its current model or phase right now. That doesn't necessarily mean that it is a high risk to your business. It simply outlines the specific risks, for example, personal data or discrimination biases that Sabrina was referring to in the previous slide. So you really need to, going back to the beginning of what we said, you really need to get very specific on the use case and the risk. And if final decisions aren't being made in, let's say, an HR type application, then maybe you don't have such a high risk as the actual application or the AI Act really states. But that needs to be analyzed in its own context. So considering all of the overall security topics, you also need to consider the regulatory topics and how to balance those in your application and your risk assessments. Okay, so, all right, let's move on. Okay.
Sorry, my mic was cut off. Sorry, thank you, Mike. So now that we talked a little bit about the threats, I would say main threats that can be considered to tailor the risk assessment and taking account of your own context, maybe we can talk before giving you some mapping of the controls with the standards, some key points about mitigation strategies that can be kept in mind in order to face those threats and those risks. As use case, we talked about let's say the development of the IA itself within your companies. You will certainly do for the next few years have this kind of project. So you will have, of course, to put security in place for IE development life cycle. So as always, as security expert, this IA development life cycle will be put in place implementing secure coding practices. So you can refer, of course, to the standards and best practices. For example, we talked about OWASP, that is very useful in this case. You will put throughout testing and validation also, like any other model, you can also put this kind of best practices and a strategy for your IE development pipelines. You will also think about, and this is the chat we'd have with one of my previous colleagues, favor always trusted vendors. I mean, you won't stop. We talked later on about shadow IT. So you people are willing to use this kind of of technology. They can faster their jobs. It can be can leverage and accelerate the processes and the productivity of your company. So it could be interesting to rely in this case on trusted vendors instead of letting them using the platform as a shadow IT way. For example, we can say that Microsoft propose this kind of services with the OpenIA, and they give you guarantee about some important topic as a security expert, such as confidentiality, localization of the data, and so on. So it will be a strategy to make people use your own application instead of shadow IT by themselves. Regular audit would be also a good practice to put in place, and a key point, conducting regular security audit and assessment of IE system will help you to find out vulnerabilities and correct them on a continuous way. For data protection, you will have to ensure that strong data governance policies and practices are in place to protect the data used by the IA systems. As we said, and as we found out, IA can use a large volume of data. So put these data protection policies in place and enforce them, and auditing them regularly, making sure that they are in place and followed by your colleagues will be a good way to put a framework and rules to monitor the systems. A very important point is also human oversight and transparency and expandability, and of course awareness for your colleagues to explain that the risk about the IA usage, especially the one of shadow IT. So now we can talk about, propose you some relevant control and mapping to manage IA risk. So we have 5 minutes to finish the webinar, so I won't comment every single point of this mapping control. So you have on the left the improvement that you want to set up, so and the remediation that you want to put in place in the scope of strategy of mitigation. And on the right, you can see that we mapped it on the 2701 version 2022 release to be able to cope with this this objective.
Yeah, so it's very similar. These are very similar last two slides. And basically, these are a couple of examples of controls on a per use case basis. So for example, I'll just take one of them in the AI and security tools. So you want to focus on operational security, among other things. You want to apply strict controls on the operation of the AI tools, and to manage the case of potentially handling large volumes of false positives, ideally testing before, but really the whole point is to map controls from ISO 27001 to the risks that you find in your risk assessment. So that's the general point of this slide here, and we're running out of time. So I'm going to end it there, and then we can take some questions. So if you want to send us your questions, just type them in, and we can read them off, and then one or both of us can answer. So I don't see any questions coming in yet, but we'll just wait a moment until questions do come in.
Thank you both, Sabrina and Mike, for delivering this highly informative webinar. So there have been a lot of questions that the audience have asked. We will not be able to answer them all, but I have picked a few of them. So I think the question that has been asked the most was how to audit AI.
Okay, I will select this one. So the first point is really you need to get specific on the industry in which you work in. So your audit context is really going to be, what industry regulations or challenges does your specific industry face? What kind of applications does AI have in your organization? If you don't know what AI applications you're using, the kind of tools that you're using, you don't really know the direction that you can audit. And then from there, you can kind of get an idea of the highest risk areas within your business. Then I would really start there at the highest risk areas and then think about the regulatory risk, your common security controls. So in my view, the fundamental controls are the most important because your business needs them anyway, and an application of AI can enhance the risk that those lack of controls may present. So something like that, you might want to consider a mix of new and emerging risks or threats that AI presents, and then monitoring and testing your classical or your traditional controls. So consider framing it in that sense. I don't know if Sabrina, you have an answer to that?
Yeah, you have to audit the IA, taking account of course, technology relying on it and the life cycle of the development that has been put in place. So I totally agree with you, Mike.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, should we expect an updated version of the ISO IEC 27005, including recommendations related to AI risks or threats?
Yes and no, but I would really focus on the emerging regulations right now instead of the actual standards, because I believe it'll take some time for the actual threats or the new standards to be developed, and both the standards and the regulations are going to take some time to develop. They're moving quite slow compared to the development of artificial intelligence. So you really want to understand those in their spirit, right? So understand like the main concepts in the fact that your risk assessment in both of those standards is really the starting point for pretty much everything and the context. And then once you understand that, you can understand basically the regulatory risk there. And then if you start with a risk assessment in your approach, have like a risk-based approach to pretty much all that you do in this context, then complying with any sort of standard in the future is going to be a lot easier. But remember, in the case of, let's say, the EU AI Act, just because the EU passes that, it doesn't mean that the member states adopt it and create their own versions, which comes after the passing. So this isn't like it's going to happen tomorrow. And so you really need to start today with your current risks, because the threats that you're facing are like today. The standards and the regulations are what I would call a tomorrow problem, but you can prepare with them by taking a risk-based approach using the best practices in 27001 and 27005 that we already know today. I don't know if there's any additional comments on that, or
No comments, and I agree that the standards should be at the end, include the threat models, and but as you said, it would take times, and now relying on regulation is highly important to set a framework, a legal framework to use the IA in securely speaking and also ethically speaking.
Okay, and last question. Is there a difference between managing classic third-party risks and managing the risk of an AI provider?
yes, this is a great question. In general, I don't like to trust third parties, and managing third-party risk is very difficult because, it's just an opinion, that any sort of attestation that a third party might have is questionable at best, because the entire practice around getting that attestation can be quite questionable. At the end, you have to trust that. But organizations can pass an attestation and then, for example, not securely maintain your data. So in the context of, let's say you have an AI provider, of course, they want to host their data in the cloud. And that means that what they might promise an organization is to keep their data contained, but you don't necessarily have assurances that that's the case. So it's really going to be very difficult to get those assurances, but you really need to take a specific approach to getting those assurances that your data is managed the way that you want.
Yeah, and to this assurances, you can set up in your contract agreement regular audit of the third-party risk management. And also we see that in the field of industry, there's a lot of product that is used to monitor continuously the public exposure of some SaaS platform, for example. This is not enough, but this can help to identify I would say some information about the decrease of security level in some cases, and maybe you can set up a process telling that in certain threshold of decreasement you set up an audit, and then you control the data security to make it up again.
Thank you once again, both Sabrina and Mike, for delivering this highly informative webinar. There have been a lot more questions that we will make sure to address them via email. Unfortunately, we have no more time to address them now. Yeah, thank you very much for attending this webinar. Sabrina and Mike, it was a pleasure to have you on our panel. Also, please be informed that this session is recorded and will be posted on our website and YouTube channel along with the slides of the presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.